Welcome to the Adoption and Foster Care Journey, a podcast to encourage, educate, and equip you to care for children and youth through adoption, foster, and kinship care. Hosted by an adoptive mom with over 22 years of kinship and adoptive parenting experience. She's on this journey with you. Please welcome Sandra Flach.
The Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. That is 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 11 and 12. I am your host, Sandra Flach. Welcome to the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, where it is my passion and privilege to serve you. As a mom myself of 8, 5 through adoption, including 2 young adult sons diagnosed with fetal alcohol syndrome when they were little, and we had no resources or understanding about all of that. I'm familiar with the struggles and the challenges that come from raising children with trauma histories and with prenatal exposure to alcohol. And I want this podcast to be the resource for you that I never had all of those years. I want it to become your community because we are here for you and we want to help you navigate your parenting journey. So we have resources, including coming up very soon. We will be releasing my devotional book, Soul Care Saturday, 52 Devotions for Foster and Adoptive Moms. I finally got my edits back from the editor, or the manuscript back from my editor, and I'm just putting the final touches on those edits. And I'm confident that we will be able to launch the devotional sometime in November, which is our goal, because November, as you are probably familiar with, is National Adoption Month. And we felt like that would be a fitting time to release a devotional for adoptive moms. So stay tuned to this podcast and to our social media and our website, and you'll be able to find out exactly when it's launching and how you can get a copy and all of that. So we're working out the details of a launch team. So perhaps you might be interested in being part of that. So stay tuned and you'll be learning more. I'll have hopefully more information on our next podcast. So keep an eye out for that. And also, I hope that you will check out our website, justicefororphansny.org. JFO is our parent organization. That is the nonprofit that I founded about 14 years ago. And this podcast was birthed out of that. And so we have a whole separate section of our nonprofit that is really devoted to foster and adoptive parents. This is the part that I lead. I used to be the executive director for all of those years over the whole organization. And gratefully, thankfully, this past January, I was able to hand over the reins to the daily operations so I could really focus on ministering to you through this podcast, through our FASD training and parent coaching and writing and speaking and all of the things. So our support group and whatnot. So if you go to justicefororphansny.org, click on, there's a beautiful big circle there that says the Adoption and Foster Care Journey. Click on that and you will find all of the things that are resources and supports for your parenting journey. So I hope you will do that. There is a link in the show notes to make it super easy. Be sure to follow our social media. So in addition to Justice for Orphans having its own social media, we have separated out and have our own pages for the Adoption and Foster Care Journey. So if you have not yet begun following us there, please, please, please hop on over. We're on Facebook as the Adoption and Foster Care Journey, and you'll find us on Instagram at AFC_journey. and like and follow those pages. We're trying to build them up and provide great content specifically to serve you there. So I hope that you will do that. And it's also a great place for us to connect because I love to connect with you. Just days away, I will be connecting with some of you, I hope, at the Replanted Conference in Chicago. That is actually this week. If you're listening to this podcast as it drops on Monday, I think it's the 20th or so. I don't have the calendar in front of me, but I will be at Replanted on October 23rd through the 25th. I'll be leading a workshop entitled Wired Differently, Understanding FASD Trauma and the Brain. And I'll also have an exhibitor booth there. So if you are at Replanted, which is an amazing retreat for foster and adoptive parents, come by the booth, attend my workshop, connect with me there. Would love to do that. And also, my 2026 calendar is starting to get some dates in it. I don't want to say it's filled up, but it's getting pretty busy already. I will be at Jamie Finn of Foster the Family's Filled retreat for foster and adoptive moms. That is January 30th through February 1st, 2026 in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I do know that registration is now open, and it's my understanding that they sell out quickly. So if you are interested in attending Filled, it's for moms. There's a link in our show notes where you can go and click and go right to Filled Retreat and be able to register. So I hope to see you there. And I know also at the end of February, I'll be in Birmingham, Alabama. And I'll also be, I believe it is March, I will be back in Ohio for, goodness, there's a big statewide Ohio conference. And I'm blank at the moment at the name of it. It'll come to me probably at night when I'm in bed. But yes, I'll be back in Ohio. So I hope to see you there. And yeah, so check out, stay tuned to our social media because those things are listed there as well as this podcast. And if you're interested in having me come and speak to your group to lead an FASD training or a foster and adoptive mom retreat, reach out to me. My email, where you can contact me directly, is in the show notes below. You can also email me if you have a question or a comment or just want to send me an email and let me know what this podcast means to you. Please do so. You can reach me. That is my not my personal, but my professional email, and I answer it all throughout the day. So you can contact me very easily that way. So now let's get on to our guest today. We have with us April Ficklin. April is a TBRI, trust-based relational intervention practitioner, a former high school English teacher, and mom of 4 teens whose family grew through adoption over 9 years ago. With over 25 years of experience working with children, teens, and families, April now serves as Director of Family Services for Flourishing Families of South Carolina, providing coaching and support to adoptive families. She has shared her advocacy through keynotes, podcasts, and workshops, inspiring audiences to better understand adoption. Her passion for teaching, writing, and family advocacy shines through every endeavor, offering families and professionals hope in the overwhelm. And she's here with us today to bring us some hope. So please welcome April Ficklin. Hi, April. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sandra. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I'm thrilled to get to know you a little bit. I think we've connected on social media for the most part, and was thrilled when you agreed to be on this show. So I'm excited to get to know more about your story and for our listeners to do that as well. And I know you're an adoptive mom. So would you share with us your family's adoption story? What set you about to adopt, and how did that come about, and what was that like?
Sure. So for me, adoption was something that began to grow as an idea, as a calling from God very early in my life. When I was a teenager, I was on a short-term mission trip to Providence, Rhode Island. I have this, I don't remember a lot of the trip, but I have this really clear memory of being at a park with the kids that we were serving and pushing three children on a tire swing. And for some reason, God used that moment to kind of just place in my heart this desire that as I got older and pursued a family, that adoption would be part of that story. So really, I went into adoption very naive. Um, I looked at it very romanticized. For many, many years, even when I would be like out in public and see families that looked different from one another, and I would make assumptions they were adopted. I felt these like warm and fuzzy feelings about this calling God had on my life. Um, but as I got older and married in my early 20s, it was conversation that happened very early on in our marriage. It was still a very serious, heartbeat that I had for this. And so my husband knew early on that at some point, this is probably going to be part of our story. We didn't know what that was going to look like. I didn't know exactly how that would pan out, but we knew it would probably be part of our story. And so we actually had two biological children first. I had a daughter who is now 18 and a son who's 16. And so we were just kind of loving life and raising them. And I was primarily a stay-at-home mom, working part-time with some teaching jobs. I had originally a high school educator. I taught English. Um, and as they got into elementary school age, we decided to really have some serious conversations about adopting. And so we started the process through our state's, social services. So our Department of Social Services started that paperwork and began that journey. The licensing took longer than we anticipated, but in that process, I actually reconnected with a childhood friend, a friend that she and I had gone to kindergarten with. We had lost track of each other after graduation, hadn't really talked, but the magic of social media, had reconnected. And she actually worked at a local children's home. And it's really interesting how God orchestrates things and like lines things up so that he's a really clear part of the story, so that later when you look back, you never doubt that these things were orchestrated by God and ordained by him. And so this children's home was actually one that was served by my elementary school when I was a child. So I remember knowing that there were children in our school who lived in this children's home. In fact, my oldest two children, before we even began the adoption process, we had things like bake sales and lemonade stands, and we would donate money to this particular local children's home. And so after we were licensed and I had reconnected with this friend, um, our local DSS actually matched us with a sibling group of a boy and a girl who were living currently at this children's home.
Wow.
And my adopted son now, he actually was a kindergartner at my biological children's elementary school. And so this childhood friend knew our children before they became part of our lives. These teachers that we had already fallen in love with had been an important part of my biological children's lives, already knew my son before he even came into our lives. So it's a really just beautiful orchestration that God did that became really important. I mean, at the time, it was beautiful and it felt great. And it was like, okay, this is the thing we're supposed to do. And this is lining up beautifully and how it's supposed to be. But I didn't realize at the time how important that would become as an altar moment for us as parents when things got a little challenging down the road. But 9.5 years ago, they moved, my two adopted children moved in on Good Friday. And 6 months to the day they moved in, we finalized their adoption. So the licensing was slow, but the adoption was super quick, which was really a blessing at the time.
Wow. And how old now? Son and daughter, how old were
Yes.
they when they came to move in, when they moved in?
Yes, they were. My son was almost 6. We celebrated his birthday a week or so after they moved in, and then my daughter was 4. But I always say she was a teenager on the inside from the beginning. So she's now technically a teenager, but she's always been a teenager.
Love that sass, right? I'm assuming there was
Yes,
sass in there.
a lot of
Uh,
spirit.
yes, love that. So, and we know that our kids come with some, with loss and some level of trauma. So, they were little, but what was that adjustment like when they came into your family?
Thanks for asking that. Yeah, it's, I think, a really important part of our story because I mentioned before, I was really naive. I really had this romanticized idea of what this was going to be. Parenting was going fairly well for us with our biological children. They were thriving, they were doing well. They were, easily well behaved and academically successful, and all those things were going well. And so we were really probably at the point of parenting those two that had been the easiest. Up to this point, they were early elementary school. It was just a fun age. And so I was really excited about adding to our family. I particularly we opened up our license for 2 because my biological son and daughter were so close that I felt like just one might feel like odd man out. And so I was like, well, we'll open it to 2. And so we did that. But quite honestly, we had a reality check very quickly. I mentioned they moved in on Good Friday. On Saturday morning, I remember waking up and there was already chaos happening out in my living room. And I was thinking, what in the world had we done? Going from, parents of 2 children to 4 overnight. And so what we found was that parenting became much more stressful, chaotic, and challenging than we expected it to be. And even though these 2 new additions to our family were super adorable and precious, and we loved them immediately, there was no question. All 4 of us fell in love immediately. Um, Behaviors began to pop up that became really frustrating. And really, over time, what I've recognized is probably what was more frustrating is we didn't have the tools to know how to handle them. But we thought we did. And so we kept throwing parenting strategies that had worked for our biological children, that worked for us growing up as children. We kept throwing these same strategies at these behaviors, and nothing was changing. And so we were just growing in frustration. We were growing in really doing things in an ineffective way for meeting the needs of our kids. And that's what we were really missing is knowing how to meet the needs of these 2 children differently than we needed to meet the needs of our biological children. And so for many weeks and months and even into years, I really feel like there was just a lot of chaos in our home. There was a lot of love and a lot of joy and a lot of fun, but also a lot of chaos and a lot of frustration. And I spent many nights crying myself to sleep and literally praying for supernatural parenting. Like I remember just praying to God, like, please just give me supernatural parents. I obviously cannot do this on my own. Like I recognized that early. The humility came fast. But like, just please give me that supernatural parenting. And then I would wake up the next day and it would just be, I was messing it up again. Like I just felt like I could not make the changes in me that were necessary to make the changes in my home. And I always say, like, you know, how mama goes, the family goes. Like, it kind of sets the tone of where we are. And this mama was not doing great for a long time. So it
And
was a
I,
big challenge.
yeah, and I totally resonate with you. And I feel like some agencies do a good job at equipping families and some maybe not so much. And our family story, different from yours in many ways, as far as we had 3 biological children and no aspirations to ever adopt or foster.
Mhm.
However, we did welcome into our family a kinship placement. So a little girl who was a relative, she was 8 years old. So she came to us, and by coming to us, she didn't go into foster care. which was wonderful. But we also had zero any kind of training. There was not a class, a course, nothing. Nothing. Not even like, hey, you maybe want to read this book. So we knew absolutely nothing about trauma, absolutely nothing about attachment, absolutely nothing about anything but traditional parenting, which was working
Right.
lovely with our three younger kids, which she kind of, her age wise, she fit in the middle of our two oldest sons. And then we had a 3-year-old daughter also. So she clicked in, but we just didn't understand the behaviors, right? Because
Yes.
they can look willful and defiant and rebellious and all of that. So then you're with traditional parenting, right? We want to issue consequences and
Right.
disciplines and all and corrections and all of those things, which I know, I'm sure that you know, and I'm sure our listeners do too. That just sort of prevents and blocks attachment and connection because you're spending so much time and energy trying to fix this, and it doesn't get fixed. It becomes harder.
Yes.
Were you, because I know eventually we learned some things after we adopted internationally. We brought home a sibling set of four, and it was sort of in the midst of all of that that we started reading the books, and I discovered Dr. Karen Purvis and the connected child and all of the things. And finally, we're learning the tools that we needed. And our youngest two adopted internationally also were diagnosed with fetal alcohol syndrome. Did you have any of that going on? Were your kids exposed to alcohol in utero? Do you know?
We don't. There was drug exposure as part of the story, but we don't know a lot of details otherwise. And really, that I think, like you talked about, like really what happens is there are so many layers of complexity to what's happening with our children who come from these hard backgrounds. And it's really hard to comprehend it when, I came from a safe, loving home. I was raising children in a safe, loving home. I didn't really have a way to comprehend the levels of complexity that were going to come with a child who had had these hard beginnings. And so we have like, what are the effects of trauma and attachment disruption? Then are there, things on top of that like substance exposure and how is that affecting them? Are there other diagnoses? Often in the children's homes, those children get quick to be diagnosed and quick to be medicated. And so we were having to sort through, is this accurate? Are these medications useful, necessary? How is it impacting behavior? And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of layers of complexity that I spent a lot of time early on feeling like I needed to be able to like pull them out and figure out what was what. And over the years, I've kind of gotten to the point where I'm still, I have a stack of books right next to me right now because I'm still researching and learning. But also, I recognize a lot of the way that we eventually shifted our parenting is an approach that would take care of most of the complexities anyway. It's not perfect by any means, but it allowed us to just kind of change our approach in a way that doesn't look at everything as willful disobedience and instead offers up more scaffolding, more support, just a different view of what behavior comes from, and then how to approach that.
Yeah. How did what was your aha moment? How did you discover the tools? Because I know now you're a TBRI practitioner, but what was that aha moment for you that you finally found what was going to help your family and your kids?
I think for us, it was a really slow progression, honestly. And, in a lot of ways, I wish that that hadn't been the case, but I know that there's purpose in that. But the first step was that about a year into the adoption, we were really struggling. We were getting calls from school a lot. We were having a lot of behaviors that were really like disturbing to it, a lot of lying and manipulative behaviors and those kinds of things. And we joined a local small group of adoptive and foster moms, of parents, not just moms. And so my husband and I went weekly to this group, and the children had childcare. And we finally sat in a room where we began to share our experiences with this group, kind of venting about what was happening in our home, like this crazy thing just happened, like, let me tell you about what happened. And everyone in the room would just organically nod their head. And I was like, wait a minute.
I'm not
Like,
the only one.
right, you understand. I'm not crazy. Like, you understand this is happening in your home too. And it really was one of the first moments when I recognized, um, okay, like this is something different than I'm just not doing it right. Like there's something more to this. And at the same time, I was also coming across things like a Jason Johnson's blog. He was one of the first ones, adoptive parents I read, where I was like, oh, okay, like I'm not losing my mind. There is this thing called secondary trauma. Like I was starting to put some pieces together. And in the midst of that, one of the moms from that small group suggested the Connected Child. And I got it quickly. I read it quickly, but I did not necessarily adopt it as quickly as I would have liked because I was hesitant. It felt permissive and soft and different than what I was used to. But it also gave me a lot of insight. I mean, very early on, there was a lot of insight about fear and trauma in that book. But it took me a little longer to start to adopt the actual strategies for trust-based relational intervention. Um, but it opened up a lot of conversations. So my husband and I started having a lot of conversations about what we were reading and what wasn't working in our home and how we needed to start making some shifts. So yeah, Connected Child was one of the first connections for me as well to be able to
Yeah.
kind of make that
And
change.
I mean, we were in a desperate place too. We had, our daughter had come in and I think by the time she was 14, we adopted internationally and a sibling set of four, but the first three came home
Mm,
together. And by that time I knew to read, like I read it before we went, I read a book on attachment. Like hadn't found the Connected Child yet. But when the fourth one came home, he had been in the orphanage for all 5 years of his life. He was the most impacted by prenatal exposure. And we were like drowning. And we were also a homeschool family. So we were at this homeschool convention. And for lunch the one day, my husband and I, thankfully, were there. We didn't have to bring our kids with us. Grandparents stepped in there, but we spotted another homeschooling family across the way at a table, and it was parents, and they had a little girl that was clearly she'd been adopted from China, I believe, and so we kind of like went over and sat because we're like, these people are adoptive parents, and
right.
they actually told us about the Connected Child book, and I ordered it immediately, and when it came, I dove in desperation, and I'm like, oh my gosh, because that's where I first learned about you know trauma and fear and having to disarm that fear and build the attachment and earn trust and all of that. And I just was like highlighting and sticky noting and doing all the things and trying to implement everything I could as I was reading it. And then I remember ordering DVDs when those were a thing from Texas Christian University of Dr.
Yeah.
Purvis, like teaching. And my
Yeah.
husband and I watched those together, and he was like, how come we didn't know this before? Like, why didn't we know this? So, and then we just became little gurus and we live in New York and we flew to Nashville for Empowered to Connect way back when Dr. Purvis herself was teaching. So we got to a couple different times sit right under her teaching those 3-day seminars and learned so much, went on to become empowered, um, empowered to connect parent trainers. So we
Mhm.
did that for a long time and just applying those principles saved our family, I
Yep.
believe.
Hmm.
And it was definitely, counter to the traditional parenting. And then now, so many years later, when our two youngest boys, both diagnosed with FAS, became teenagers, um, we had attachment and connection, had a lot of great things going on, but then we were recognizing, oh, but the dumpster is on fire again. Like, what is going on? And that's when
Right.
I ended up going and getting professional training in FASD because that was like next level. Um, but it fits, I learned the neurobehavioral model, which fits perfectly with TBRI, right? So it's not still understanding, trauma, prenatal exposure impacts the brain, which will affect behavior. And these behaviors are really symptoms to what's really been going on, right? So
Yep.
I love TBRI, but that was, I'll never forget that aha moment when I got the Connected Child and it was like,
Yes.
This is it. So I love that. So what are some of the connected parenting strategies that worked for your family? Like, what did you start to implement that you noticed, okay, this is finally working?
Yeah, so I think going back to what you mentioned about, care and purpose really begins to explain in the connected child this impact of fear. And I think one of the misconceptions I had is what fear would look like. And so, I knew that my children would be fearful. It makes sense, right? They're moving into a stranger's home. They would be shy, timid. My daughter really struggled the first few nights of my husband trying to tuck her in because she wasn't accustomed to male caregivers. And so that kind of fear made sense. And when it made sense, it was easy to know how to approach it. But what I didn't recognize was that the really like consistent lying and sneaking behaviors and the tantrums and like those types of behaviors were also manifestations of fear. And what was really happening years later, as I look back, what I recognize is what was really happening is we just had this constant tension of fears happening in our home that we weren't recognizing and articulating as fear. So we had that coming from our children. They didn't recognize it as fear, right? It's not something that they're able to verbalize. It's something that's happening in the brain. And so I've learned that what happens with a child who has this history of trauma is that their brain, especially their amygdala, kind of defaults to recognizing so many things in the world as a threat. And so much around my children was being interpreted by their brains as a threat. And I didn't recognize that because I was a safe person. I loved them. I was their mom. I was looking out for them. I was taking care of them. Um, I didn't expect, I didn't think I was a threat, but in their brains, a lot of the things, even just being in our home or having new caregivers or, new smells and sounds and new schools and those types of things were all being interpreted as threats in their brain. And so they were leaning hard into what their brain had learned to do to survive, which was look out for number one. I'm going to lie in this situation if it feels best for me, even if it doesn't make sense. It didn't make sense to me as a mom why the lies were happening, but to the child it did. Um, I am going to melt down in this moment. It's not. I said that like as a choice. It's not a choice, but their nervous systems melt down because they're so overwhelmed with these threats. So first, I started to learn and understand more of that, but then I also started to recognize part of the problem was I was coming to my children with my own fears. So they had these behaviors that began to scare me because in my mind, especially in this traditional approach and paradigm that I was used to in parenting, it was my job to change their behaviors if their behaviors were negative. And things like lying and stealing and manipulating were behaviors that were going to land them in jail one day, right? So I was looking at the face of my beautiful 6-year-old son who had these frustrating behaviors. And in my mind, I was thinking, I have to change this right now, or you're going to be in prison at 21. Like that was what was happening in my brain. And so my children were dysregulated, and I was becoming more and more dysregulated because I was focused more on changing the behavior than I was on building trust. And so once I made that connection, that it wasn't like I remember my husband and I used to take walks up and down the street right in front of our house. We couldn't go too far away because the chaos would ensue inside the house, but we could walk up and down the street and we would talk about, okay, well, why is it that for the oldest two, these consequences worked fine? Like it worked. That that pattern of here's the behavior we don't like, we give it a consequence that the child isn't, doesn't really enjoy, and they change their behavior to avoid the consequence. That's worked. Why is that not working anymore? And I finally had this moment as I dug further into trust-based relational intervention that the piece that was missing was the trust. That my biological children, it's not something that we had to do intentionally because it happened over time through attachment that our children trusted us. And so the consequences didn't work because they were consequences. They worked because my children already trusted me. So my two new children, we didn't have that trust bond. And so I had to come to a point where I was willing to slow down the need to change behavior and increase the focus on building trust, my children building trust in me. And so it came from learning to really disarm their nervous systems. And so I had to really change my approach. And quite honestly, a lot of it was changing my posture, like my changing the way that I stood as I parented, the way my voice sounded when I parented, where I was when I parent, like instead of lobbing words across a room to a child, I had to learn to sit on the couch together, to kind of take a casual posture so that I could relax my nervous system and my child's nervous system could stay relaxed too. Because once they become dysregulated, we're not going to get changed behavior anyway. And so those lessons were the ones that have been the most powerful for me as a mom, is that I'm constantly thinking, okay, how do I remain regulated and how do I keep my child regulated? And right after, so I began to learn TBRI kind of in pieces. It started with the Connected Child. I read more, learned more, and then I got connected with Amy Cooper, who is the executive director of Flourishing Families, where I work now. And when we first connected, she was teaching TBRI classes, and I wanted to do that for my family, but then COVID hit and everything went virtual, and I really wanted in person. But before that was able to happen, a position opened up, several positions actually opened up because the organization was brand new. Flourishing Families was brand new, and they were beginning to have a relationship with our local DSS. And she asked if I was interested in being a part of that. And I can talk a little bit more about that story in a second. But what that did was lead me to eventually becoming a trust-based relational intervention practitioner so that I could also teach TBRI to others and be a family coach for our organization. And so right after I got my practitioner training, I mean, within the week, I got a phone call from the principal at my child's school, and my child had taken a screwdriver to school that day. It was a teeny tiny screwdriver, ended up being, but had taken a screwdriver to school that day. They considered a screwdriver a weapon. And my child had told them that they didn't know that they had it. There was an accident. And so the whole drive up, I'm thinking, there's no way this was an accident. They knew they had, I was getting angrier and angrier. I was inconvenienced in my day to have to take this trip to the school. And so I texted my colleagues telling them what happened. And one said, okay, don't forget that you need to investigate what's the need behind this behavior. And so I was able to, okay, I just finished all of this training. I know these things, but it still wasn't my intuition, right? I still needed to be really intentional. And so instead of heading to the school, being ready to like just, have this tense conversation with this child and correct this behavior, I grabbed a snack for the child because I knew that the best way for me to get to the bottom of what had happened was for me to keep that child regulated. So I needed to do everything I could, took a snack, took water, paid attention to my voice, welcomed my child after I picked them up. Like we didn't go immediately into what the conflict was. I had to really disarm them so that we could have a real conversation. And at the end of the day, what I found out was that the real issue that my child was feeling unsafe around some other students and in the school and being, you know, antagonized. And instead of focusing on the consequence for that decision of my child, we started focusing on what could we do at school for them to feel safer there. who is an adult that they could go to. And so that was not an approach I ever would have taken if I was still in that traditional mindset of there has to be a consequence to this behavior, instead. So from there, I've really been able to try to keep that framework of how do we build trust, how do we stay disarmed, and how do we solve problems together rather than just leaning on consequences.
Sandra Flach, host of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, and FASD educator Debbie Raymond, invite you to join Hope for the FASD Journey, a virtual support community for parents and caregivers raising individuals with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, diagnosed or not. This faith-based support community meets online 3 times each month, features special VIP guests, and a private Facebook group for members only, which includes Soul Care Saturday video devotionals led by Sandra and Deb. Both Sandra and Deb are adoptive moms raising kids with FASD and facilitators of the Facets neurobehavioral model. For details and to register, visit justicefororphansny.org/hope-community. That's justicefororphansny.org/hope-community.
The one thing about consequences too, April, is because in all of my years of parenting before we got any kind of formal training was, use those consequences and they don't work, and especially with children who are prenatally exposed to alcohol, the part of their brain that is really affected is that in the prefrontal cortex, your executive function. And one of the brain tasks of executive function is to link cause and effect. And so when that is not working properly, consequences don't work because we want them to say, oh, maybe they didn't do their homework, so we issue a consequence. And because we want them the next time to remember to bring their homework home and do their homework. So, but if the consequence doesn't work, if they don't remember why they're experiencing the consequence, they don't connect the two, there's no learning that comes from that, but there then becomes a whole lot of frustration. The kiddo is frustrated, then the parent is more frustrated. So I know with consequences, maybe natural consequences over time can work, but when we're issuing consequences, whether it's, at school or at home, oftentimes it just makes more problems and there's not any learning going on. Because a lot of times you have, like you said, you have to look at what's going on. What was the reason for this behavior? We have to get very curious and do a little bit of that research to find out what was really going on so that we can support them well so that they can learn appropriate of coping. So I love that. One of the other tools that I know we've learned through TBRI is the power of giving voice. Would you share why that is so important and what does that mean?
Absolutely. So as I've learned about attachment seems to be the one piece that we're not talking about a lot enough in this world. I think trauma and trauma informed has become a big buzzword, but that really can encompass a lot of things. Lots of people experience lots of different types of trauma, and that's not necessarily the same type of trauma. Our children who have come from a broken home, and a broken family, experience, because it's really the disrupted attachment that makes a great impact on the child's brain. And one of the impacts of disrupted attachment is that the child learns that they have no voice. So as a baby, when we have a need that needs to be met, we'll cry and our caregiver will come and they will feed us or rock us or, swaddle us or whatever is needed. And they do that with emotional warmth and love. And when that happens, several things are happening simultaneously to that baby. The baby is going from distress to calm. The baby's nervous system is going from a stress response to a calming response over and over again. The brain is releasing, excitatory neurotransmitters and hormones and then inhibitory ones. So there's this pattern that happens back and forth and back and forth. And through that, our children learn that if they use their voice, if they cry, their needs get met. And so a healthy attached child will continue through life to use their voice to get their needs met. And so when they are, like my biological children, if my biological children wanted a snack in my home, they would feel comfortable coming to mom or dad and asking for a snack. Or if it's time for bed and they're in the middle of playing Legos and they're not quite done yet, they feel comfortable enough to ask to continue for a few minutes before bed. Like those things just came naturally. With our children with disrupted attachment, they don't have that same power of their voice. They don't trust that they have that, because what happened was they used their voice as babies and no one came. And no one met their needs. And that happened over and over again, so that their brain learned, my voice is not the thing that's going to get my needs met. I've got to figure something else out. And so they do. I mean, our brains are going to keep us alive, that it's going to do its job. And so these children become so adept at using other strategies to get their needs met, and they become so wise and clever in that way. And it's important. It's adaptive. It's important for them at the time. But when they come into our home, it becomes maladaptive, right? Because we expect them to use their voice to get their needs met. And so one of the things I really wish someone had been able to articulate to me when I first adopted was, your child does not know they have permission to ask for what they need or want. Because a lot of the behaviors that were happening then and that are still continuing to happen 9.5 years later, because it doesn't just disappear overnight, or just because I know TBRI doesn't mean all the behaviors disappear. Those behaviors still exist because my child does not believe that they have permission to ask for what they need or want, and that I'm going to be able to say yes. Now, I say it, I literally say those words to my child. You have permission to ask for what you need or want. I'm going to try to say yes every time I can. Like, that's a conversation we have on repeat, that you can ask. We just ask, and I will say yes as often as I can. And I have said yes many times where my inclination would have been to say no, just so I can keep building that trust in my child, because I told my child, if you will ask, I will try to say yes. And so if it's safe, if I can do it, that's what I've learned to do. And what I've found is things still aren't perfect. They still don't necessarily use their voice every time they have a need. They still kind of slip into some of those survival strategies, but more often they ask for what they need. More often they ask permission. More often they know and can trust that we're going to say yes. And so we have less behaviors. We have less lying that happens in the home. We have less stealing happens in the home. We have less manipulation. And when it does happen, we can kind of recognize it now for what it is and reframe it and ask the child to, like, okay, nope, that, like, I'll use an example. We have every Sunday after church, we eat lunch with a particular family of ours, friends of ours, and sometimes it's in our homes and sometimes it's out at restaurants. And so we were eating together in our home one time. We had finished lunch and there were cookies for dessert. And so everyone had had a cookie. And one of my children came to me later and said, I wonder how many cookies would be appropriate for somebody to have. And so it was very awkward and bizarre. It wasn't a normal, like, engagement with a child at this age, a elementary school child. And I stopped them and said, okay, hold on. A manipulative question. So let's instead ask the question you really want to ask. And so I led them into asking for more cookies, which is of course what they wanted, right? And so we often still have moments when we do that. We like have that redo, we have that practice of, here is what you really wanted to ask. Now ask it and let you hear me say yes, so that your brain hears me saying yes and can feel that yes over and over. Because really what we're doing a lot of times is retraining their nervous systems, so that their nervous systems can trust that they're safe. And when they're safe, they're going to make better choices and have better behaviors.
Yeah, I love that. The power of saying yes. Because I found with, again, this is way back before we knew anything about trauma or TBRI or any of it, with our daughter who came in through kinship, who's now 35, but this is back when she was little. Because I didn't know any better, and because the behaviors were so hard, and I spent so much time correcting and
Yes.
consequencing and all of that. When she would ask for things, I didn't always feel like I wanted to say yes, right? I'm
Yes.
not in the mood to say yes, which is,
Yeah.
I look back now and I cringe at my own behavior, but I didn't know. When you don't know what you don't know,
Mhm.
got to give ourselves some grace.
That's right.
But then when I began to learn this, many, many years later, when our kids who came through international adoption and we're like learning this, and I began to recognize, oh my goodness, she was a child who'd experienced trauma before coming to us. We had no idea. So I began to like, and then she was no longer living home. She was out of the home. She was in her early 20s. But I remember kind of, I don't even know if I was like consciously giving a yes, but I just knew that I had to do this. And she didn't even use words. We had family portraits taken at our house outside one summer. And, we wanted all of the kids there, and we had some grandkids by that time. And we really wanted her to come. And we had, you know, we had an okay relationship, but it definitely had been strained by all of the things.
Right.
And she came and she had a dog that was her dog. And I could recognize right away, this is her like emotional support, like unofficial emotional support
Okay.
doggy. And we go outside and we're getting in our, trying to get in our positions for this to get pictures taken. And she had her dog. And I know one of my other adult kids kind of whispered, like, Mom, she's going to have her dog, like in our family portrait. And our actual family dog was in the picture. And I just said, yeah, and it's okay. So she didn't ask with words, but I just allowed that to happen without saying anything because I knew she needed it to feel safe and to feel, like she needed that. And in a way, that was saying yes without her actually asking. And that was like money in the bank for like the next thing down the road. Um,
Right.
so even when our kids are older and out of the house, you can still apply some of these principles and they do still work because this was the daughter who 3 years ago when she was having her first baby and she was living in another state wanted me to come and be there for the delivery of the baby. So we kind of turned this big corner, but it was kind of like, how can I give yeses now? Now I will confess it's a little easier to give yeses when they're not under your roof and you're not living in the
Uh,
stress and the chaos every day.
right.
But it still works when you apply it. And I find that to be, sometimes we can't go on based on our feelings because we're not always going to feel like it. But when it's
Mhm.
safe and there's no real reason to say no, why
Yes.
can't we say yes? Because these kids, they haven't had a voice,
Right.
for their life before coming to us. And, they need to, and they've been told so many no's, right? They've had no power there. So to be
Yeah.
able to give yeses, it's like money in the bank. It's so, so important. And I know, April, you have some other great stories, where you've shifted your parenting and something to do with a candy bar, I think, and some other things. So tell us your stories, kind of give us examples of how this works.
Sure. I'll give you a couple of examples that could just kind of stand out. And it's funny because so often they do revolve around food. But really, one of the reasons, I mean, I know you have a lot of foster adoptive parents who listen to this, and a lot of us struggle with food issues with our children, right? Because food is survival. It's part of that survival piece. But we had a moment when I was learning, like you said, to say yes, and I was learning this shift of, okay, right now in this season, my job is to earn my children's trust. We can still change behavior. Like we can get there. These behaviors are not okay, but what I've been doing isn't working to change the behavior. So let me try something else. And that something else was, okay, I'm going to do what I can to build that trust. And so I had four children, and my oldest daughter had a candy bar in the fridge, and it went missing. And the challenge with having two children in the home who both have this history of trauma is we're not sure who might have been the culprit, right, of taking this candy bar. And this type of behavior was becoming an issue, not just because stealing's wrong, but it was creating a lot of tension with the siblings. So, the four children there was a lot of tension when one keeps taking things from another. And then if you're, as a parent, you're trying to navigate this, like, do I give a consequence? What do I do here so that one child feels vindicated for the issue and the other learns the lesson or whatever it is. But in this moment, I decided I would do something that I never would have imagined I would have done. And I finally said, okay, this is what I'm going to do. If the person who took this candy bar will just come tell me that they took the candy bar, then and tell the truth, then I will buy everybody a candy bar, even the person that stole the candy bar. And it got kind of quiet, and they all looked at me kind of funny. And a few minutes later, one of my children peeped up and said, "Are you serious that you're going to buy everybody a candy bar?" And I said, "Yep, I will buy everyone a candy bar when this person tells the truth." And so that child confessed to having taken the candy bar, and I bought every child, including that child, a candy bar. And it seems crazy because I would have thought earlier in my parenting that would be rewarding bad behavior, right? Like, you took something that wasn't yours and I'm giving you this reward, but it wasn't that wasn't what I was doing. What I was doing was teaching that child, if you do the things that I'm trying to teach you are the right things, you can trust me. I will live up to my word. And here is how you can test that. I'm going to live up to my word to do this thing. And so a lot of times we kind of have to be creative and think outside the box in ways that kind of teach these lessons of trust when they didn't come intuitively through that attachment early on. And so a lot of times that's what's happened. And so that same child who, was obviously, we had some behaviors that demonstrated that, there were attachment issues. I mean, both children had them, of course. Um, a few years down the road, I was making peanut butter jelly this wasn't that long ago, maybe a year or so ago. Making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches one night for dinner. One of those moments when I was just like, keeping it simple, not making a big fancy meal. It was probably had been a hard day. There was probably a lot going on. I was just doing the easiest thing possible, which was to make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And I overheard this child tell another sibling, "She's making me a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. That's what mamas do."
Mm.
And it was just this, like, moment wherein I recognized, like, oh, like, this is working. Like, the attachment is growing. Even when it felt like early on nothing was going to change, they're getting it. They're understanding that this is a safe place. These are safe people I can trust. They're going to take care of me. And this was my child who, um, when they first moved in, like, when it was bedtime and we read stories, they insisted reading the story themselves, like, very, almost like very self-confident, but also really kind of resistant of accepting care. Um, and so to come along actually as they were getting into adolescence at a time when you kind of push back on your parents a little more, and I was able to see, oh, actually we're seeing a lot of attachment growth now. That little peanut butter sandwich became a really beautiful symbol to me to remind me, okay, this is actually working. What we're trying is really working.
Learning, that's what mamas do, right? And I know my youngest, who's now 20, when I give him, I put dinner or a snack, in front of him, he'll say sometimes, not every time, but often will say, "Oh, you're so good to me." And I always say, "I know I can't help it. I love you." And he'll say, "I know you do." Now, he may turn around later, and when he can't do something he wanted to do, he'll say, "You're mean." We get,
Right.
we hear those things. But to just, like, that little dialogue, it happens over and over again in our home, because he'll say, "You're good to me," and I'll say, "I can't help it. I love you." And that's what, or that's what moms do. And
Yeah.
and a lot of practice with that script, and those behaviors. I just love that. April, how old are your kids now and how are they doing?
So my two biological children are 18 and 16, and my two adopted children are 15 and 14. Um, and yeah, we're in such a better place than we were years ago. And it has been slow. And again, as I mentioned before, one of the one of the things I really felt like God was saying to me at the beginning of this, even though I went in so blindly, I feel like, is that He did say it would be hard, but there would be joy. And I really do feel like that has been a mantra that has played out to be true over and over again. And so um, they're all teenagers right now, and I know for a lot of people that teenagers are scary, but I love teenagers. It's such a sweet season of being able to see them really begin to figure out who they are and what they're good at, and embrace that, and really even start to strengthen those sibling relationships as they get older. My oldest has moved to college, and so um, they're starting to feel the importance of those connections with each other. And so, one of the beautiful things, we've talked a lot about attachment, and we work on attachment with parents, right? But it's also been beautiful to see them have attachment with their siblings, because every healthy relationship they build is going to help them build healthy relationships in the future. So, yeah, a lot. My son was third grade was like just the year that it all felt like it was coming to a head, and seemed like school was really, really a struggle. And we were in the, teachers conference room over and over again. And last year he finished his freshman year with A's and B's on his own. And so we really remind a lot of parents who are at the beginning of these journeys or hitting some complications, or who are recognizing that what they've been doing hasn't been working, but they don't know what to do next. And they're not really sure they trust me that what I'm saying is going to do it. Um, but that it does. Like being able to have this shift of really recognizing what I want is not just a child who can be a successful worker in the work field and have relations. I want a child who doesn't just leave home and is able to make it. I want a child who, when they make mistakes in adulthood, I'm still the person they come back to. That's the relationship. That was part of that shift of recognizing, okay, then what do I do in this moment so that that's what I have when they're 25. And remembering that really helped convince me that the strategies needed to change. And even though they didn't fit into what maybe culturally I was being told, it was going to be worth it. And we're starting to see those fruits come for sure.
Yeah, it's a huge paradigm shift, right?
Yeah.
From, when we use the TBRI principles and understanding, trauma and fear and building trust and all of those principles. And then even, on top of that, we've added the neural behavioral model and understanding how
Yes.
alcohol has altered this child's brain. It works differently. We have to understand, what happened and what those symptoms are and how to better support. Because we've got kids that are not, they're not just typical kids. We can't just use traditional parenting. It's not going to work. But so much healing and progress can be made when we have the right tools, right? And I love that. Love TBRI. Love that. So thrilled. And if our listeners aren't familiar, sometimes we talk and I'm like, who doesn't know about the Connected Child and Dr. Karen Purvis, or the Connected Parenting book that she and Lisa Qualls wrote together. But if you aren't familiar with it, Google it. We'll put a link in the show notes even so that you can learn more about trust-based relational intervention. It changed my family's life. April, it sounds like that was what changed everything for your family. So we highly recommend that to every parent listening. So I want to pivot now to talk about the verse, because I opened with 1 Kings 19:11 through 12. Let me read it again because we've had so much conversation. Just as a refresher,
Right.
the Lord said, "Go and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. So April, you chose those verses. What do they mean to you?
So I think as I look at the story of Elijah, and if you put that verse into context, it's really interesting to look to see what happened right before that verse. Not long before that was when Elijah had gone before the prophets of Baal, and they had kind of put up their dueling altars, right? And so they were going to see which God was going to actually um, set the altar on fire. And so we see this happen, and it's this huge miracle that happens because of the faith of Elijah. I mean, that's really why God is able to perform this miracle in front of all of these people. You know, Elijah is like everything is affirmed that Elijah has said based on God following through here. But what happens right after that is Elijah flees because he knows he's in danger now, and he becomes very depressed and very scared, and to the point where he even talks about not wanting to live. And that's where he's isolated on this mountain. He's feeling depressed, even just very desperate. And I feel like it's such a great picture of what adoptive parenting is like. And because what people on the outside see is that we finalize these adoptions, and that's the big miracle moment, right? So, all the healing has happened. Here's the miracle. Here's this complete family that's been put together through adoption. That's what the world outside sees. But what we know when we're living in these homes is this just the beginning of any healing. And that there's a lot of work to still be done. And so we often get to a lot of us, like I work with parents every day, and I see them at their most desperate moments, just like Elijah. And a lot of times when we're in that desperation and when we're in this stress and overwhelm, we're looking for a big change, something significant, the right treatment, the whatever it's going to be that's going to give our family the healing it needs. And really the way it actually happens is it comes in small steps, and in God giving us just really tiny baby step guidance along the way. Because ultimately, what happens before our children heal is that we heal a lot of pieces of ourself on this journey. And it's really us that changes more than anything. And it's our changes that allow other healing and changes to happen in our home. So it really is, I really encourage other foster adoptive parents to look for those small wins. Those little things really are the big things. The peanut butter jelly sandwich is not a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It's attachment. Like that's a huge thing, but I had to have the lens of looking for the small moment so I could see the big glory. And so Elijah was expecting God to be in all these grand gestures, but he wasn't. He's in this still voice, and that's true for us too. That we do have to kind of find those quiet moments of reflection and be able to see, okay, what were the altar moments? Where has God been faithful all along? And maybe we're not where we want to be, but where have we come from and what has already changed? And so, yeah, as I look at that story of Elijah, I can't help but think about all my adoptive parents that I work with.
Oh, I love that. So speaking of the families that you work with, let's talk about Flourishing Families of South Carolina. What do you do as the Director of Family Services? Tell us about that.
Thanks. So I help lead a team of family coaches. We are all we're I call us unicorns because we all of us who work directly with families are adoptive, kinship, or foster parents. And so we all have lived experience, and the majority of us are also TBRI practitioners. And so we contract with our South Carolina Department of Social Services to provide adoption services. So from the beginning, where a family is just gotten their license and an approved home study, we help prepare them for this. We start to introduce them to TBRI. We connect them with other families who are in the same position, all the way to serving families who, adopted when their children were 2 and now they've hit adolescence, and things have gotten really stressful really fast and they're in crisis. So kind of this big spectrum of need and stress that families come to us, but we're able to do individual family coaching with the families to help preserve the family, help offer some healing and some hope to them.
Yeah, I love that. So for our listeners who are in South Carolina, what is your website so that they can find you easily?
Sure. You can find us at flourishingfamiliessc.org. And we offer services, even our services through our contract come for families who adopted through South Carolina, but we also have group caregiver coaching that's all aligned and based on TBRI for any family that's looking for some support. So definitely come over and check out the website, look around, send in a little request, and we can give you some more information.
Yeah. So is that training for any family on TBRI, is that done online? So if a family's in another state?
It is. It's all virtual.
Wonderful, wonderful. So we will include a link in our show notes. It's flourishingfamiliessc.org, and we'll put that link in there. So anybody listening, you're wanting to learn more about TBRI, or if you are in South Carolina and want to get connected as well, we can do that. So love that. Love the work that you're doing. As we wrap up, April, as you know, our listeners are essentially foster and adoptive parents like us. So would you leave us with some words of encouragement and hope as we wrap up?
Absolutely. I remember when things were really, really hard, my Bible sitting on my nightstand and it feeling too heavy to pick up. But when I did, I also found the scripture of when the Israelites are fighting the Amalekites and Moses goes on the mountain and he becomes weak and tired. And Aaron and Hur have to hold up his arms, and that's when they're successful. And so I just want to encourage families that this can be a really lonely, isolating journey. And the way to best do the work yourself and find healing for yourself and for your family is to look for that community of other people who have the same experiences, who can nod their heads, who can hold up your arms and accept that help, so that you can have the strength that you need to persevere.
I love that, April. Thank you so much for sharing your story today and for all that you are doing on behalf of families in South Carolina and beyond. And thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much. Enjoyed chatting with you.
Well, thank you for listening to the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast today. I hope that you were inspired and encouraged by my conversation with April Ficklin. Whether you are a faithful weekly listener, listen on occasion, or maybe this was your first time, we are here to inspire and encourage and equip you for your unique parenting journey. And we have a brand new episode that drops every single week. So you will not be left without one. And I hope that you will tune in because we've got some great resources. In addition to this podcast, you heard the commercial about our support group, the Hope for the FASD Journey community. Like April mentioned, we need each other. We need to hold up each other's weary arms. And that support group are, a bunch of parents who are raising kids who have come to us through adoption or foster or kinship, and have been prenatally exposed. Some are diagnosed, some are not. And we have families in there who have little kids to several families who have kids. We say kids, they're in their 20s, still living home, and just being able to learn from one another and share resources and ideas and just pray for and with each other. It is just such an important community. It's an online community. We have members who are from Washington State and California all the way to New York, where I am, and in between. So I hope that if you're on this journey and you're feeling, desperate and alone, reach out, because we would love to have you as part of that group. I also offer one-on-one online parent coaching and our online and in-person training and workshops around FASD. You can find out about all of the above, register, learn more just go to our website, justicefororphansny.org, and you'll click on the Adoption and Foster Care Journey tab, and it will take you to all of our resources. And again, I'm a mom on this journey with you. I have two sons who are in their 20s, both diagnosed with fetal alcohol syndrome when they were little. And I spent years trying to figure out what was going on and what was going to work. And some things worked. TBRI worked wonderfully until we recognized when they were in their teens, we need something like on top of that. Like we need something a little bit more. And I finally found that. And that's why we provide resources to help you, because it doesn't necessarily get easier especially if there was prenatal exposure to alcohol. And maybe you don't know about the alcohol piece. Maybe maybe mom used drugs. We tend to find if there was drug use, there was also alcohol use. Alcohol is legal, it's easily accessible, and they typically go hand in hand, right? So, and it's more harmful to the brain than even the drugs. So you'll learn a lot about that on this podcast and in my blog and in the other resources that we have. Every month I offer a free 1-hour intro to FASD where you can learn more. That's an online workshop, absolutely free for the hour. You'll learn a ton. And I've had so many families reach out after they've heard me speak or share on that and recognize, oh my gosh, you just described my kid. Like this is really what's going on here. So lots of resources. So check out the website so that you can find out when, I'm offering those courses. I often offer every month a 3-hour, a little bit more in depth than the 1 hour. And then starting at the end of this month, so this is October, if you're listening to this in real time, at the very end of October, I'm beginning, will be the first of 5 sessions. So we call it our deep dive into FASD. It's 15 hours worth of content. And we meet for 5 Thursday nights online for 3 hours each session. And we use the Facets neurobehavioral model and really go deep into learning about FASD and how to apply a brain-based approach to parenting, a neurobehavioral approach to parenting kids with brain differences. So it's not too late to register for that. And we do give certificates of completion at the end of the course. So if you need, training hours for your foster parenting license or whatever, we do have those. So you can get 15 hours in, super simple, before the end of the year even. So check that out. And again, go to the website. There's a link to Justice for Orphans in the show notes to make it easy, so you don't even have to remember all the things that I just said. Check out my blog and sign up for my monthly newsletter. That is on our website as well. Subscribe and follow this podcast. Leave us a review if you're listening on Apple. We also have this podcast in the video version on our YouTube page. It's the Justice for Orphans YouTube page. All of the podcasts in the video form are there so that you can check that out as well. Find and follow us on social media. And also, again, I'm just grateful if you're still listening and you're maybe still walking or folding laundry or driving or whatever that you're doing. I am grateful that you spent your valuable time with me today. I am thrilled to have you along for the journey.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, brought to you by Justice for Orphans. We hope you were encouraged today. Please be sure to subscribe to this podcast and leave a review, and share it with your fellow foster and adoptive parent friends so they can be encouraged too. Be sure to find and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Justice for Orphans, and check out our website for vital resources at justicefororphansny.org.